You said that page up, page down.
Page up, page down, yeah.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. So, again, I'm the SAC director in Arizona. We have worked on this project where we don't have really a direct partner with our state victim services agencies. So within ACJC, our organization, we have a victim services program manager who administers, it's the comp, right? Yeah, he administers some of the federal dollars that we get from VOCA, and then it's distributed. We have a very decentralized model in Arizona, which is interesting. It makes it difficult to work with people when the money is kind of spread out everywhere. So in 2016, the SAC had put together a report for what they call the State Agency Coordinating Team, or the SACT. So we've got our SAC, did a report for SACT, and basically they wanted to know, like, okay, so all these different agencies across the state are getting federal dollars for victim services for the administrative and the comp program, but who is getting funded, what, like, there's just really no connection between these different agencies. So the big players all got together and formed this team, and we did a brief report for them, basically outlining what funds they were receiving and who was being funded. So with this project, we'd look to expand on that, to add in more details to help them make their funding decisions. So we're really, I think some of the other projects are going to be a little bit more advanced in terms of the things that we're doing. What we found in Arizona was that we really needed to step it back and just kind of figure out what is happening before we can make any determinations or recommendations on how they should proceed going forward. So project overview, are the funds through the Crime Victim Fund being used in the most effective manner? And what we've found so far is that there's a lot of overlap between agencies. You may find a subgrantee who's being funded out of multiple pots, and the agencies don't necessarily know that. They don't necessarily know that there's overlap going on. So we really just wanted to see, you know, what funds are available in the state, who is being funded, what programs and services are being offered. And it just kind of really, again, getting this sort of high-level overview of what's going on within our state. Another thing that we wanted to know was sort of the distribution of these funds. So what programs or what subgrantees are offering what kinds of services? And is there a gap in terms of need for services for specific types of victimization versus what's actually getting funded? So who's getting what money, and what is essentially that money going towards? And Arizona is a very, it's an interesting state for a lot of reasons. As a Florida native, it's been a learning curve for sure. But we have these really big rural communities. So Coconino County, for example, is the third largest county in the nation in terms of size, in terms of the geographic size. But it's very, very small, so like the Grand Canyon's out there, and there's a whole lot of nothing. We also have a lot of tribal lands, and so, you know, we have these sort of vast swaths, and we have essentially two cities of Phoenix and Tucson, which Tucson to me is not a big city. It's like a Tallahassee-sized city. That's our big city. So we wanted to know, you know, are the programs and services that are being funded going towards victims who need those services, or is there some mismatch? So one of the things that we're doing is updating the 2016 report that we had provided to the SAC team, and we'll talk about, Grace will fill in more on the details of that project, but they are already very actively looking forward to using our findings at their January planning and strategic meeting. So the SAC members that we've talked to are, you know, really excited to get some additional information on, like, how they make these decisions and what's going on. And then we're also providing 2 maps. So one will be to the SAC team members that'll have an overlay with crime data, just to look in terms of the programs and services that are being offered in different areas, are they matching up with the types of crimes that we're seeing, the types of victimizations that are occurring? And then we'll host on our website a public map. So if you were a victim and you were looking for services, you now have a location to come and find what's in your area and what's close to you and where to go, which we found kind of in the research coming up to this project was that none of that really existed. You might be able to find information specifically on domestic violence providers, or you might be able to find something for a county, but not for the state overall. And so that's one of the things that we're going to make available and push out through these various funding agencies of here's how you can actually get that information that you're looking for.
So our research was divided into two components. We, like we mentioned, in order to update our report, we needed to kind of talk to not only the funding distributors, but also the agencies that get funded. So that kind of was filtered out as the survey part. So we started with the recruitment. So we sent out the first batch of emails to the state agency coordinating team to first kind of get their perspective on, you know, how they fund, you know, and what they kind of want out of this funding, or what they want to get out of funding these agencies. And then we also included follow-up questions when we needed more information between like how they are providing funding and whatnot. And then we also asked them to send us a list of their agencies that get funded so that we could follow up with them specifically. So then once we kind of we finished the first round of emails, then we went to the second round, which was to the agencies that got funded by each of these SAC agencies. And so as of the moment, we have 30 to 45 agencies that are participating and have participated. We have kind of extended the length of how of our survey recruitment because there are a lot of agencies that expressed interest. And I will talk more about the reason as to why we had to extend it later in our limitations. And then we also followed up with them because sometimes they didn't give us detailed answers of, you know, what they were using the funding for. Sometimes it's very generic. So we have that as well. We used SurveyMonkey as our web platform, and this part of the research project was more of a qualitative analysis. And then for the mapping, we used ArcGIS online, a very easy mapping platform, and we found that we could transfer that map online to our website very easily. So for the first part, when we looked at locations of victim services, we used any publicly available information. That way, you know, no one's information is compromised. It's something that anyone could look up on the internet, and that way, you know, no one felt uncomfortable being like, well, we're a domestic violence agency, we'd rather not give you our information. It was whatever was available and whatever the agency had put out online. And then we also used arrest data for comparison to kind of see, okay, where are the crimes occurring compared to where the victim resources are located. So I kind of compiled the basics for our surveys. So I found that a lot of these funded agencies had two different approaches. They talked about the needs for their agency, but then as well as talking about needs for victims. And this was kind of not as, this wasn't as highlighted, you know, when we were talking to the state agency coordinating team. So this was very valuable to understand, okay, it's not just agencies who ask for money, they gave, you know, they have very specific reasons as to why they need it, you know, to provide funding and salaries for their personnel, but also, you know, these providers need training too. They need grant training, and a lot of these organizations are run through, helped through volunteers. So they find the funding very necessary to give them recognition, to give them training, and then it's just to help with outreach, education, and awareness. And then they also expanded upon needs for victims. A lot of the agencies that we found in Arizona are very related to domestic violence and sexual violence, but primarily domestic violence. And they say, you know, we are talking about crime victims, so we can't just limit to, you know, certain things. So they say that, you know, if we had more funding, we could start including like victims of financial crime, victims of homicide, or family victims of homicide and things like that. And also, there needs to be a distinguishing factor between victims of domestic violence and victims of sexual violence. In the state of Arizona, they tend to get lumped together due to limited resources and funding. And then we have other agencies that kind of provide for victims, not just directly, but also indirectly, like through housing, providing them housing services and things like that. And so they said that, you know, we would also appreciate funding to kind of provide meals and food for victims in that way. So this was a very, the survey part was very interesting because it gave these agencies a little bit more of a voice than rather just saying, like, we need it for our victims. They gave us very specific reasons as to why we need it, and these are the same results that we're going to present to the state agency coordinating team so that they know, you know, here's where the money is going to, but here's where it also could be going to if they get more funding, or, you know, and that's something that they can work together through.
And then there's no domestic violence also, like, in statute, right? It's just a flag.
No.
Yeah. So, okay. So, I just wanted to like, sort of as an aside, I think it's really interesting in Arizona that there's so much of a focus on domestic violence funding for these types of programs, because we don't actually have a statute for domestic violence. It's just, so it'd be like an assault and then there's a flag for DV. So it's, yeah, it's an odd state. Yeah.
So this is kind of the basis of our map. ArcGIS was being a little stubborn with me, so I wasn't able to zoom in as well. But you can kind of, this is kind of what the public will be seeing. And what, if you click on something, this is what pops up. So this kind of gives them very easy ways to look for an office, but also ways to contact them.
Then just to kind of point out, I mean, you can see this is not surprising to us based on sort of the makeup of the state, but this isn't the entire state, but you get the sense that, like, things are sort of lumped in the Phoenix, Maricopa area, and then in terms of, like, the rest of the population, there's just kind of nothing. I mean, you may end up being in a place where you might have to drive 3-6 hours to have a service, and so for the SAC team to be able to visually see that also, I think, is helpful. And not just say, well, yeah, okay, we have all the counties checked off, but are you meeting where the population is at?
So through this project, we learned that, you know, there was a big difference. We didn't really know the scope of funding in Arizona, so it was really, you know, interesting for us to realize, okay, so we have our top tier, the people who get the money from VOCA, and how they distribute it, and then also understanding that those are not the same agencies that also get funding from them. So it's like a very indirect and direct. That was kind of important information. I think, you know, at a glance, no one would be able to kind of understand that from a face value, surface value. And then we also struggled because there were two sorts of funding that these agencies got, and it was whether victim assistance and victim compensation. And when you ask them these kinds of questions, depending on which avenue they're distributing money, they have very different perspectives on how the money should be used, and things like that. And I mentioned earlier that we extended our time for participants to participate in our survey, and that was because I think everyone recognizes that when we try to recruit, people are very hesitant to give us their time. And I think, you know, we always promise, we make these promises of like, this data is very valuable, right? And I think in the beginning it wasn't clear to them that what they tell us will actually be delivered to the people giving them funding. So they were very like, this doesn't pertain to me, like, we already do this, we already give reports. So afterwards, you know, when we were kind of hitting a stone wall, we came back and I was like, we will be presenting these results, not just to the state agency coordinating team, but also to, you know, JRSA. It's a bigger scope than what they think. And so after that, people were a lot quicker to respond. They were more willing to not just give like blank, like, you know, oh, we need funding, but more like, okay, well, this is where funding goes to, this is how much we get, you know. So we have extended it so that we give them enough time. We will be meeting with the SAC agencies at the beginning of January, so we wanted to give them a little bit more time in case they wanted to change answers or add more to it. And then same for The other thing, I didn't include the mapping for the arrest data simply because it's a little bit more of a private information. And so as we also understand, like when we share data too, we sometimes get a limited scope of what the data holds. And so understanding how to use this limited arrest record data and then how to figure out, okay, how can we show the location, like crime location, without compromising what we have and privacy concerns and things like that. So those were things that were not initially considered, but, you know, throughout the scope of the project, these were things that we learned and we tried to implement later in our study. So.
Yeah, and I think, like I mentioned, there's limitations in terms of just the data that we have. We don't have any sort of victimization data that's collected at the state. We don't, within our arrest statutes, the arrest data that we do have is limited, obviously, because they have to put the flag in there. So we're assuming that there's going to be a degree of underreporting in terms of what's actually like a domestic violence and other types of victimization-related offenses. So there's certainly limitations in that data, but we figured it was at least kind of a step in the right direction of like trying to provide some more information to them. If you guys are at all familiar with the transition over to NIBRS from UCR data, not very far in that process. So we get a lot of questions from, I've had conversations with different SAC members where they're like, well, what we'd really like to know is what's the relationship of the victims? And like, well, yeah, we'd love that too, you know? But we just, in terms of the data that's collected, there's a lot of limitations. And then future directions, so we're going to, you know, continue to build on the mapping, adding in additional data as we, you know, see use for it. So like census data would be really helpful to, again, that idea of if we have these really big rural populations, like where are the people located at versus where are the services, and trying to give them, give the SAC team more of an idea of, you know, how best to fund. And getting across to the subgrantees that this isn't about trying to take away their money. Everyone wants more money, but it's trying to make sure that we're matching the needs with the services that are being provided. And so trying to, you know, really express that and help people understand what the goal is. We've also talked a bit of some of these other coordinating team members. So DPS in particular receives quite a bit of victim funding, the Department of Public Safety in Arizona. And so we'll be looking to partner with them potentially in 2019 to help them specifically figure out more of their funding and, you know, what it is their process is. Ideally, we'd like to eventually get to the point of actually evaluating some of these subgrantees, but at this point, we're really, again, just kind of a very high-level understanding of what's going on. Looking at, you know, more data sharing with more of these agencies, trying to, you know, help build up resources for them to be able to make informed decisions. I think that was it. Yep, that was it.